Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. My name is Wiley Cash, and I'm here to welcome you to another edition of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. We haven't done one of these in a very long time, but we have come back with some triumph here with our special guest tonight. There is a lot going on in the world this evening. Some of you are probably reeling from the news here in our country, the recent news here, and we extend our sympathies and our hope and our light and whatever we can muster to the families that have been affected down in Texas. And it is an honor to be with you all in the spirit of coming together to perhaps heal our minds a little bit over a discussion of literature. And we will get back to the world soon enough. But the book that we are discussing tonight certainly confronts and takes on many of the issues that are shaping our contemporary moment. And I'm sure that our guest and I will get into that bit of information. But as I said at the top, my name is Wiley Cash. I am the recent book winner of the SIBA Southern Book Award for my novel, When Ghosts Come Home. I'm the host of Reader Meet Writer. We've been doing these events since the pandemic really took hold of us about 2 years ago, and we've continued with them. In the before times, we would be coming to you at a bookstore in your community, and we would have perhaps a narrow audience. Well, events like this allow us to have a much larger audience for a writer and an artist and a man and a citizen who definitely deserves and commands and has long had a very wide audience. So I'm thrilled to be here tonight with James Lee Burke. I'll tell you a little bit about SIBA. It represents just under 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the Southeast. And perhaps you are here at tonight's live event because one of those bookstores brought this information or this Zoom link, or perhaps Mr. Burke's book to you. If that is the case, please reward and thank and support the independent bookstore in your community. We need them now more than ever. They are some of our last bastions of democracy and community engagement and activity and support. So please support them when you can. If you have any questions tonight for James Lee Burke about writing, about living out west, about living and being from Louisiana, about his brilliant new novel, Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there. Make sure to mention your name and the name of your home independent bookstore, and I will ask Mr. Burke your questions at the end of tonight's show. So please stick around for that. It will not bother us at all if you put your questions in there while we are talking. We will see them at the end. But without further ado, I know why you are all here. You are not here to hear me talk about the wonders of Zoom and the Q&A button. You are here for our very special guest. Tonight's guest is James Lee Burke, and you often hear this person does not need an introduction, and this person certainly doesn't. But he is a New York Times bestselling author, a two-time winner of the Edgar Award, and the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship for Creative Arts and Fiction. He has authored 40 novels and 2 short story collections. He is a living legend, and he now lives in Missoula, Montana. Mr. James Lee Burke, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is quite an honor.
It's my honor also. Thank you for having me on this show.
Well, you know, your book is just recently out, and I got a review copy of it, and I was gripped. Entertained is not a strong enough word. I was gripped by so much of this novel. I was scared. I was emotional. I was mad. I was fulfilled. I went through so many emotions while reading this. So now the pressure is on you after I say all that. Can you give us kind of a synopsis and tell us a little bit about what the book is about?
Well, it's narrated by a character who has narrated previous novels I've written. Aaron Holland Broussard is his name. He, at the time of the writing of the book, is 85 years old. He has recently lost his daughter. He's in depression. He's obviously deeply clinically depressed. And has actually moved on into an area that psychiatrists call a Gethsemane experience, because person sweats blood. He literally sweats blood. And it's an experience that can be so intense that, well, it can lead a person to killing himself. But if he comes out on the other end, and most times a person will, he belongs then to a very special club. But the psychic pain the protagonist talks about is mirrored also by kinds of evil. I say kinds of evil that he is surrounded by, because indeed those things happen. Namely, the massacre at Wounded Knee over in the Black Hills in the Dakotas. But much closer to home, the Baker massacre on the Marias River, and what is called the Battle of the Big Hole, which was not a battle, it was genocide. And that's the word. It's the word that we do not ever apply to our own history. But that, in effect, these events were not aberrations. They were policy. And they were committed by the same people who got their education in the Civil War. Now, I won't get into all that, but it's a long string. These things didn't just happen. Mm-hmm. But Mr. Sherman once said war is hell. He guaranteed it was hell because he was a terrorist and he declared war on civilians. That's what he did. He was also an advocate of wiping out the bison, and they did a great job of it. And they eventually conquered the Indians by simply starving them to death. These are not metaphors. They're not exaggerations. It's what happened. But the one at the massacre on the Marias River, the Baker massacre, went beyond any of the others. It's one of those things you do not want to believe that human beings are capable of. It was that bad. No, very few people know about it, even though in terms of magnitude, the wounded and those who were killed. It's actually, I'm being more graphic than the story, the written story is, but it's hard to think about it. We don't want to, it's probably a mark of our humanity. We don't want to face it because it's pretty ugly stuff. And these fellows were not conquering what is that term used? Taming the West, conquering the wilderness. What rot.
Yeah. Well, what your book forces us to do and forces Aaron and this community and the tribal police and local police, what it forces them to confront is that many of these forces that were alive and well in the late 19th century, the mid 19th century on into the 20th century, in terms of, you know, these genocidal acts against Native American populations are still alive and well. And your novel opens with Aaron standing on his front porch watching as a truck comes bumping up the road and a young kid gets off the back of the truck and spray paints the swastika on the barn. And can you say a little bit about Aaron's mindset that precludes him from backing down? I've never read a character who's in such psychological pain that Aaron is in, who just he is unable to step back from ethical wrongs that are waged. He's just taking it all on. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, Aaron's a quiet man, and he's like Dave Robichaux in many ways, that still water runs the deepest, that Cleet Purcell, that and he seems almost serene, but it's very misleading.
Yes,
because there's a fire inside the man. But here he is. He's got a ranch down in the Bitterroot Mountains. It's a lovely place, and it's evening time. And as you described, a red Ford 150 pulls into across the cattle gate, and cattle rumbles into the property, and this kid jumps out and vandalizes his barn, big swastika, then climbs back into the into the truck, in which his father is sitting in the passenger seat. The person driving the vehicle is a woman who is a pastor in a church that is made up of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Yeah. And the kid is standing in the back of the truck, urinates in the cattle guard, and then says, "Why don't you go back to where you came from?
Yeah.
Welcome to Montana."
Yeah.
Well, we've got some people like that around here. They're here. They're here.
Well,
you know.
and that kind of ignites, he doesn't, now Aaron has to do something, and that act of vandalism really opens a chasm that in many ways Aaron might wish had remained closed, but it opens, a lot of insight. It opens a window to our contemporary moment. Can you talk a little bit about all of the contemporary conflicts you managed to, we have the historical, many of the massacres that you mentioned at the top of the show are mentioned in the book. And then there's a scene where Aaron goes down to a diner to meet a local cop, and there's Black Lives Matter protesters, there's Donald Make America Great Again protesters, there's Second Amendment protesters walking around with semi-automatic weapons. Can you talk about squeezing all of that chaos into this book and writing at a time of great chaos?
Well, actually, it was, unfortunately, it was easy because it's exactly where we are. It's here. Just suddenly, I watched that scene there in the courthouse by the restaurant. In fact, my boy was in the Black Lives Matter. My boy is 62 years old. You wouldn't know it, but he was with all these kids. He was among all these kids, the Black Matter kids, and they were doing, what do they call it? A street theater lying down. And then the people across the street said, well, they were carrying, I saw at least one AR-15, but supposedly this was a statement about their support of the Second Amendment. That's nonsense. What they're trying to do is frighten people. But anyway, I thought, this is Missoula, Montana. I mean, Missoula, some people call it, I don't know, what is it? Golly, it's not a complimentary term, boy, I don't know. It's a very liberal town or a progressive town, but actually it's antithetical, it's an egalitarian society here, and it's always been a place where people were just really exceptionally good people and kind, decent, and people of every kind of background. That's what's always been great about Montana. But I think there are many people, and I don't understand, it's very angry. They're just angry, and I don't know at what. I can guess. What I really feel is going on is it started with NAFTA, the collapse of blue-collar unions. We have a greater number of service people, people working in service jobs. They're delivery people when they used to be driving machines, welding oil rigs. And And I think that's what, they see people from the outside, California, Washington State, come to Montana, and these are people who can buy ranches with their credit cards. Mm-hmm. And meantime, it's happened in Colorado, same thing. The average working class person cannot afford the rent in the city because it's very high. And the idea of buying a home in Montana now is just out of anybody's reach, unless not just if they're millionaires, but multi-millionaires many times. A 4-room house of any kind, any decent, is over $1 million.
Yeah,
many of them just, you think 6-7 million. This is Montana. It used to be a rural state.
and that kind of dynamic, there's the scene where they yell at the guy, they yell at our protagonist Aaron, they yell, "Go back to California," or something. That I think maybe the boy's father, who spray paints the swastika, says you need to go back to California. You don't bring your ideals, don't bring your worldview into this landscape. Yeah. And what you mentioned at the beginning, what makes Aaron particularly fragile is not the right word, but particularly combustible is the recent death of his daughter, which is tragic for many reasons. And if you will honor us in discussing it, but much of the emotional heft behind this novel is you losing your own daughter, and you write about her so beautifully in the opening of the book, and Aaron speaks of his own daughter so beautifully. Can you talk a little bit about writing from a place of grief and what that did to your work that it might not have done before?
Well, it didn't it had no effect on how I write, or was anything new really in terms of creativity. The subject, put it this way, we lost a child many years ago. So a person learns at the moment he discovers he has lost his child, that he has entered a place that very few people will understand, because there's something going on that appears to be just wrong. It's almost as like a blaspheming of God, because God is the creator, because the parent is supposed to die first. And there's something in us that just does not allow us to accept what we're witnessing, what just suddenly happened. And a year down the road, it's the same way. Now, I don't want people who have been through this lately to feel that there's no answer, that it's not the message. But there are certain things that a person has to learn to get not through it, but simply to realize what it is, to realize what it is. And when you hear bromides, all you want to do is get a long way away from that kind of rhetoric, because the person who is speaking to you can be well-intended, but has no idea at all of what he's talking about. Okay, and this is the way Aaron describes it. He said, it feels like a cannonball went through his chest. He feels like he has a hole as big as a pie plate. That's exactly how it is. It's not something that was hard to write about. It was easy, because there's no other way to describe it. He takes it a step farther. In that hole, he can see a blue sky, but it's filled with carrion birds. And that won't go away. It will. What eventually happens, I think, is that number one, you find out you have your own cathedral, and it's a private cathedral. And I use that as a title in a book I wrote about 3 years ago, Dave Robichaud novel. It's a place that you earn, but this is what you earn. It's acceptance. And that once you accept it, something happens. You no longer think about tomorrow. It evaporates. And you do not think about yesterday either. You just stand in the middle of the day and you have disregard for death. You accept death your own, and you have disregard for it, and you suddenly discover that with no application of your own, you have no fear of anything. You simply will walk into an airplane propeller if that's your fate. You don't feel it. You feel dead to it because in something in you that makes you fear death was taken away. And maybe it's because if a person is a believer, that he feels that maybe he will rejoin not only the person he has just lost, but all of the people he's lost over the years and the friends that he has lost. But you have no fear. You also flee people who waste your time, that you cannot concentrate on just the news of the day. That doesn't work. And when people start talking about the price of living or I don't know what's on television, you find yourself walking backwards out a door and down the street someplace. But that's what occurs. And as Aaron says, he doesn't wish for a cure, but simply a scar rather than an open wound. And
you write about grief so beautifully, and I could read a million lines, but I want to get to the questions. But I also have a couple more for you. You talked about, if you're a person of faith, or if you're a person who believes that something beyond awaits us, Aaron feels in many ways, and I'm not going to give anything away, that his daughter is reaching out to him, and that his daughter is guiding him, and that his daughter is coming behind him. And I can feel, as a father, I'm very fortunate that I haven't lost a child. I have two little girls who are 7 and 6, and I'm away from them. I'm in Kentucky on business, and they're back in North Carolina. So this is a hard book for me to read, being away from my babies, and the news of the day today is hard news to get, being away from my babies. But you write so beautifully about how much Aaron wants to feel a reach back to him, somebody coming back to him. And there's this beautiful line, and I've lost my father, but there's a beautiful line when he says something to the effect of, what if my father's spirit came to me and said, keep a brave heart? And I just thought that was so poignant and so beautiful. And I'm wondering about how you wrap so many things into this novel, the hope for a guiding hand, but we also have kind of ghostly specters and other things happening in this novel. And it felt very different from other things that I've seen from you. If you could talk about that just a little bit.
Well, you described those things very well. And there's, I think, a mystery in creation. We have things all around us that indicate that the complexity of creation does not have any kind of demonstrable physical way of being undone or understood. And when I say undone, I mean, in effect, talking about taming the West, taming the earth. This is the wrong way to think. And it's my feeling, and again, this is a feeling, that the supernatural elements in this work are not meant to be supernatural, but I do believe in what is metaphysical. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to Albert Einstein. Einstein, in one of his lectures, and maybe it was an essay I read, said that the question was, what is infinity? And he said, well, it has no edge and no outer edge. And all we can say about infinity is that the application of physics will not allow us to understand it. We do not know. His own science that he depends on is a failure. Well, what does that suggest? It suggested something that is not, it is not something that will ever be made understandable, at least until we get to a place where we say, and this applies to the believer as well, when we say there's something so much larger than myself, that it must be what people call God. And so the second question, what is his nature? And then you look around at the big blue marble and you say, this was a great gift. We got to do something with it. We have to protect it. And I look upon the Testament, Old Testament, as a metaphor. But the metaphor is very close to the reality. And in Genesis, we're told that Yahweh scoops up the clay and forms humankind and blows his breath inside of it. And from that point on, in one way or another, we have a relationship not only with the earth, the clay itself, but by the hand of God and the breath that he breathed upon us. That's a pretty good start. And it's
I think you're exactly right. I think you're exactly right. That's a pretty good start, and that's a pretty
not a mystery at all.
Yeah, that's a pretty good start, and it's a pretty good place for me to end my questions and to take some questions from the audience. If you would let us ask some questions. We have a question from Susan. Her bookstore is Square Books down in Oxford, Mississippi.
Oh, yeah.
And I know you know that store well. And Susan asks, do you have any suggestions about how to bring characters to life in fiction?
Well, they shouldn't be dead to begin with. That's not the way to do it. I'm just kidding. I know what you mean. Okay, where do our characters come from? Well, I've never been able to answer that question. Then, so this is how I think of it. The character should somehow live inside the paper. And the paper comes from the pulp that's in the tree. The tree gets its life from its roots. And so this is why I think that it's important to, at least for me, I was heavily influenced by the naturalists, starting with Stephen Crane and John, John Steinbeck, but James T. Farrell had a big influence on me. The social environment and the physical environment, for me, they generate the characteristic of the character. But I think more importantly, it's just a very practical notion. Namely, a good writer is a good listener. He doesn't talk, he listens. That the biggest challenge in both screenwriting, playwriting, and writing fiction is dialogue. And the dialogue is with us. It's all around us, but you've got to listen to it. Mm-hmm. And William Wordsworth once said, what was it? The people of humble birth oftentimes have poetic souls. And if you ever taught creative writing, or we're in a creative writing class, you know that talent has nothing to do with people's backgrounds. I mean, the fellow that fell off the garbage truck walks in and talks like a sonnet. And say, look at this guy. I spent $100,000 getting an MFA. Here's a guy that looks like he's been drunk for 8 days. Guy's got a unicorn horn coming out of his forehead. And, he's got Baudelaire on your hands.
That's hilarious. We've got another question from somebody asking about writing. Jean asks, I am 77 years old and I'm a former law enforcement officer and private investigator, and I dabble at writing. I have read every one of your novels. I have wept and laughed while reading Neon Rain and Creole Belle. What compelled you to choose Dave Robichaux as your first character? I'm Catholic, but I believe in spirits and evil.
Well, that's a good question. I published my first short story when I was 19, and then I finished writing my first novel, Half of Paradise, when I was 23, and it took me 5 years to get it in print, but I got it in print, and I got a 6-column banner headline review in the New York Sunday Times. Wow. And then I published 2 other books and did pretty well with them. And I thought I was home free. And then I wrote a book called The Lost Get Back Boogie. Wow. Okay. It started getting, I can't remember which year the rejections began. It went 13 years without a home. And it was rejected over 111 times. It's a record in the industry until LSU Press put me back in print. But the point I'm making is that I wrote all kinds of things that were rejected, not just that novel, short stories. The Southern Review kept me in print. They published all of the short stories that I sent them. God bless them. And then they published my book, a collection called The Convict, and then The Lost Get Back Boogie. But the point is that, what was the question? I just
Why did you choose Dave Robichaux?
Oh yeah, Dave Robichaux. I had 2 novels that I thought they were failures. They'd never been printed, published. And one was about a young Marine and could come back to New Iberia. He was a boxer and his name was Dave. And the other one had some material about John Bell Hood, the Confederate officer, in it. And I started thinking about it. And in the meantime, my friend, Rick DeMarinis, said, Jim, why don't you try writing a crime book, a crime novel? And he said, you've tried everything else. I said, well, why not? The next day, we were in Missoula. Next day, Pearl and I and Alifair were in San Francisco, down by the Something Lights store. Golly, I got up at 5 this morning. City Lights bookstore, Ferlinghetti's place. And I bought one of these kind of, what do you call them? Hello?
Yeah.
Hi. The screen went away.
Oh, no, I can still see you and hear you. You're fine.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, I started writing this story about a police officer in New Orleans, a detective named Dave Robichaux. And I don't know where I got the name, actually. But I took the character of the young Marine and I wrote 2 chapters and I sent them to my friend, Charles Williford. Charles and I were good friends for 20 years. And while he was a swell fella too. And he wrote me back and he said, Jim, you may have created the best police protagonist in American fiction. I just got chills all over. I still get chills on that. But here's the irony. I never changed the character, the Marine. He was still simply Dave Robichaux from New Iberia, who falls in love with the girl from Spanish Lake, Bootsy Mouton. That was it. That's the only change I made. I gave him a badge. That was it.
Wow.
And I was back in New York. And there was a bid. The three companies bid on the Neon Rain. By the third book, I had, oh my heavens, I couldn't believe it. My third book went up for a very large amount of bidding. And I'm not, what I'm saying is, we were barely getting by with 4 kids in college, and Pearl and I. We couldn't usually pay the mortgage at the Mayans. You know how much money you make teaching school. But anyway, that's how it happened. So the same character, the same themes, because my themes have always been the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Dave Robichaux put me, I was able by the third book of the series to give up my tenure. You know, it's like giving up your tenure is like giving up your union card. You know, you don't get it back. But anyway, I'm looking at a page that has a map on it.
Oh, I can see you. We can see you. You might not be able to see us, but I can see you. I'll ask you one more question, but I've got a story to tell you that a reader wrote in. Catherine says, I don't really have a question, just that I'm so glad that the librarian in Quitman, Mississippi turned me on to James Lee Burke. I had just moved from Wilmington, North Carolina, and I was looking for something to read. This was in 1996. The librarian asked if I minded strong language. I replied no, and I have read everything James Lee Burke has written since. The bookstore she signed on is under Scuppernong Books in Greensboro, North Carolina. So that's a great story. And we've got what is going to be our final question from Dennis. And Dennis says, hi, Jim. Thank you for the incredible feelings your writing causes one to feel. Do you intend to let us know what ultimately happens to Aaron? And Dennis is joining us from Fountain Bookstore in Richmond. So do you intend to let us know what ultimately happens to Aaron?
Well, I don't know myself, and that's not a specious remark. I never know where a story is going, and I never know where they come from. And I have non-chemical blackouts. I finish a book and I don't remember it anymore. I don't remember it. I don't remember writing it, and it's always been that way. Each morning I awake with 2 scenes in mind and I write them, and then I rewrite what I wrote the previous day. I shoot for 750 words a day. I do it 7 days off, no days off, maybe Christmas or emergency or something like that. But I do it, that's the way I do it. And if I do that, I can write 1 novel a year, one that I feel is the best I can do. That was the only goal I ever had, to do the best I could do. So you never have to look back and resent yourself. If it's not a good book, well, Jack Kerouac, right before he died in St. Petersburg in 1968, he was interviewed by a newspaper man there, and he asked, which writers do you like the best, Jack? He said, I like them all. And it doesn't matter if they write a good poem or a bad poem. He said, if that's man's heart or that woman's heart that's in the work, it's a good piece of art. And you never need to be subject to redress. And then he said, secondly, you let God be the judge of it. Pretty good for Jack. Yeah, he was, Kerouac was a great artist. I think On the Roads maybe the best American novel. American.
I love that book.
What a book. God.
Well, I will say, Mr. James Lee Burke, that you wrote a hell of a book here too, and I really enjoyed it. And we are out of time, but thank you so much for spending your late afternoon with us out there in Montana. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it was a pleasure and a clinic in writing to read this great new book. So thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us.
Well, thank you. You all are a swell group, and I really appreciate it. You do a great interview. So
thank you so much.
Thank the lady. Okay.
I will. Have a great night, everybody.